Hello, family. Enjoy this relaxing moment with Surly Tales. Remember to hit the like button, subscribe, and share your thoughts in the comments. It means the world to us. Also, share this video with your friends and loved ones, and turn on post notifications so you don't miss future videos from us. Thank you as you do so. Sit back and relax as we dive into the story. The midday sun cast sharp, slanting rays through the open windows of the comfortable suburban home in East Legon, one of the most affluent neighborhoods in Accra. Outside, a gentle breeze rustled the wide leaves of the palm trees that lined the neat, paved roads. Children in crisp school uniforms chased each other just out of earshot, laughing and shouting with youthful exuberance. The scene was a perfect picture of modern African living, harmonious and vibrant. Yet behind the closed doors of the lovely three-bedroom house on the corner, the beginnings of a tumultuous storm were brewing. Adwoa, a soft-spoken woman in her late 20s, had just finished arranging the living room. She stepped back to admire her work, a timid smile curling at the corners of her mouth. She had come from humble beginnings in a village 2 hours away, and her journey to the city had been full of promise. Adwoa was the kind of woman who believed in building a life with patience and integrity. Her dedication was evident in her neat, organized home and the warmth that filled its spaces. Everything about her home reflected her gentle spirit, from the carefully chosen African print throw pillows to the small, hand-woven baskets that held everyday items. Her husband, Yomensa, worked in a reputable telecommunications company in the heart of Accra. He was ambitious and always dressed sharply, often exuding a confidence that Adwoa admired, though she sometimes worried it concealed secrets. Yo had grown up in the city and carried with him the sharp, fast-paced mentality that urban life instilled. He was well known for his networking skills, boasting acquaintances that spanned from business magnates in plush offices to local mechanics in busy roadside shops. His gift of connection was one of the qualities that first drew Adwoa to him. But in recent months, she had started to sense a certain distance, like an invisible wall had arisen between them. He was staying out later, making cryptic phone calls, and returning home with new cologne scents that never quite matched any in his bathroom cabinet. Adwoa was determined not to jump to conclusions. She reminded herself of the vows they had exchanged at their wedding 3 years ago, beneath a flower-laden archway, with family members dressed in splendid Kent cloth. Their union had been a joyous occasion. Her father had wept tears of pride, and her mother had prayed fervently for a fruitful marriage. Until recently, Adwoa believed those prayers had held them in good stead. Yet something had changed, something that lingered in the air like the oppressive humidity before a tropical storm. As she straightened the family portrait on the living room wall, Adwoa's phone buzzed on the coffee table. It was an unknown number. She hesitated before answering, chewing anxiously on her lower lip, a habit she had picked up as a child whenever she felt uneasy. On the other end of the line was a woman's voice, low, confident, and laced with a subtle arrogance that prickled Adwoa's nerves. She introduced herself simply as "Na," and spoke in clipped, precise English with the slight accent often associated with those educated abroad. Na said she needed to speak to Adwoa about a matter of urgency involving Ya. For a moment, Adwoa froze, her heart pounding in her chest. The dryness in her throat made speaking difficult. She asked who Na was and why she was calling. But the woman on the other end chuckled softly, almost mockingly, and refused to give details. She only repeated that it would be in Adwoa's interest to meet her. The call ended as abruptly as it began, leaving Adwoa alone with a dial tone echoing ominously in her ear. The rest of the afternoon slid by in a haze. Adwoa vacillated between ignoring the call and investigating. Something in that smug, condescending tone told her this wasn't just a prank. There was a personal edge to the woman's words, a sense of possession. She clung to her wedding ring, twisting it around her finger, willing herself to believe Yo would never betray her trust so brazenly. Yet doubt dripped like water torture into her mind. That evening, she asked Yo if he knew a woman named Na. His reaction was so abrupt and exaggerated that it confirmed her worst fears. He nearly dropped his spoon into his steaming bowl of light soup and fufu. After an awkward pause, he stammered an explanation about a business associate who often made trouble, but his eyes shifted nervously. Adwoa recognized the look, the frantic weaving of a story by someone cornered in a lie. Over the next few days, Adwoa tried to hold onto her sense of normalcy, even as Ya's behavior grew increasingly erratic. He left home earlier than ever, returned late, and kept his phone either locked or glued to his hand. Adwoa's emotional distress grew, and she began confiding in her close friend, ESI. Together, they prayed over the situation, hoping it would blow over, but deep down, Adwoa felt her life unraveling. One weekend morning, Ya unexpectedly announced he'd be traveling to Kumasi for a work trip. He packed hurriedly, refused to make eye contact, and left in a flurry of tension. Adwoa waited until he was out of the driveway before she called his company. Her heart pounded as she dialed the office line, feeling like a trespasser. The secretary on the other end apologized politely, saying there was no scheduled business trip to Kumasi for Ya. The lie was blatant, and it felt like a slap to Adwoa's face. She sank into a dining chair, confusion and betrayal swirling inside her. At that very moment, her phone buzzed with a text message from Na. "I thought you'd like to know where your husband really is. Meet me at the Golden Lily Hotel if you dare." With trembling hands, Adwoa replayed the events of the past weeks, strange phone calls, Ya's restless nights, unexplainable cologne scents. A trail of betrayal had led her here, to a precipice of uncharted pain. She made a decision to face this mystery head-on, determined to uncover the truth for herself. Wringing her hands, she grabbed her car keys and stepped into the afternoon sun, the harsh light stinging her eyes. The roads bustled with the usual weekend traffic, hawkers selling roasted plantains, flashy cars weaving in and out of lanes, and trotro buses honking for passengers. Adwoa's heart throbbed in her chest as she navigated the streets, her thoughts on the ominous text message. By the time she reached the Golden Lily Hotel, an upscale establishment perched near the outskirts of the city, her determination had outweighed her fear. She found Na seated elegantly in the lobby. The woman was strikingly beautiful, dressed in designer clothes that clung to her tall, slender figure, and wore expensive gold jewelry that gleamed under the crystal chandeliers. Na's thick hair was styled in a chic bob, and her makeup was flawless, giving her the air of a self-assured Zil. She looked up from her phone and smiled, revealing a dimple on one cheek. But the smile was cold, and her eyes flickered with triumph. Na didn't waste time. She motioned for Adwoa to follow her to a more secluded area of the lounge, away from prying ears. Then, in a low voice filled with a sneer, she laid out the truth, or rather, her version of it. "Yo was with her now," she said. He preferred modern sophistication, luxurious vacations in Dubai, and romantic dinners in private suites over a homely life with an unrefined village girl. The words cut Adwoa to the bone. She had never thought of herself as unrefined, but the venom in Na's tone made her feel small and inadequate. She tried to hold on to her composure, blinking back tears that threatened to surface. Na ended with a chilling statement. "You can hold on to your so-called marriage, but you won't be returning home anytime soon." With that, she rose from her seat and strode out of the lounge, leaving Adwoa seated in stunned silence. The swirl of well-dressed patrons and waiters continued around her, oblivious to the destruction that had just shattered her world. Little did she know, this was only the start of the storm that would engulf her life, a tempest that would test her resilience, her dignity, and her sense of self-worth. Soon enough, Adwoa would realize that the cracks in the foundation of her marriage had deepened irreparably. And the woman she'd just met, with her mocking tone and high-handed manner, was determined to lay claim to everything Adwoa held dear, even the home that symbolized her hopes and dreams. Adwoa returned home from the Golden Lily Hotel with a roiling torrent of emotions simmering inside her. She fought to keep the tears at bay as she remembered the vicious, mocking glint in Na's eyes. The modern living room that once felt like a personal sanctuary now seemed oppressive, the silence heavy with foreboding. Every piece of furniture was wrapped in layers of memories, from the day she and Yo had picked out the L-shaped sofa to the fateful night they toasted their anniversary with champagne. Now, each memory turned sour, reminding her of a future that might never be. Nevertheless, Adwoa forced herself to move on autopilot, tidying up, preparing a simple dinner, though she had no appetite, and then pacing restlessly by the window. She waited, half expecting Yaw to walk through the door with his usual nonchalance. But as hours passed, it became clear he was staying elsewhere. Eventually, she retreated to the bedroom they once shared, praying fervently for clarity, for strength, and for a miracle. Days turned into weeks, and Yaw's behavior grew more blatant. He no longer offered excuses. If Adwoa tried to reach him by phone, he would respond with curt messages or no response at all. The illusions she had clung to shattered further when neighbors began noticing Yaw's absence, dropping subtle hints and inquiries that she struggled to answer. Gossip traveled fast in the tight-knit enclave. Women chatted behind her back at the local store, while the men eyed her sympathetically at the Sunday outdoor barbecue. Even her friend Isai, always a well of encouragement, now looked at her with pity. A few times, Adwoa still dialed Na's number, though she barely understood her own motivations for doing so. Perhaps it was an attempt to reason with her husband's new companion or to confirm whether he really had chosen another life over theirs. Each call ended in a barrage of sneers or a swift, merciless click as Na hung up. The mistress seemed to derive cruel pleasure from flaunting Yaw's whereabouts. She posted pictures on social media, showcasing weekend getaways, lavish dinners, and expensive gifts, occasionally tagging Yaw with declarations of love. Adwoa felt as though the entire world was witnessing her humiliation. What Adwoa didn't expect, though, was the boldness with which Na escalated the situation. One Thursday afternoon, Adwoa answered the doorbell to find a delivery man holding a package addressed to Mrs. Na Mensa. Confused, she double-checked the label, but it was clearly directed to her address. The package contained a set of gaudy champagne flutes and a handwritten note from Na. "You're no longer the only Mrs. Mensa in town. I'm making plans to make it official. And soon, this house will be mine too." The message was short but dripping with mockery. Adwoa's chest tightened in disbelief and anger. She felt the sting of betrayal again, as if it were new, sharp as the day she'd first confronted Na. Unable to endure the solitude, Adwoa called her mother in the village. Trembling and close to tears, she explained the situation. Her mother, a proud but caring woman, insisted that Adwoa come home at least for a while, to regain her composure. "No man's house is worth your sanity," she said in the local dialect. But Adwoa felt torn. She had built a life here. The house, acquired through a combination of Yaw's income and her modest savings, symbolized a dream. Walking away from it meant admitting defeat, letting Na and Yaw destroy everything she had worked for. Still, the stress was mounting, and her mother's concern was genuine. The next day, Adwoa decided to take a trip back to her village to clear her head. The journey was both physically and emotionally taxing. She boarded a worn-out bus at the bustling station in the heart of Accra, her thoughts muddled by worry. Commuters squeezed into every seat, baskets of produce and jerrycans of water stacked precariously in the aisles. Dust billowed through open windows, clinging to sweaty foreheads. Despite the discomfort, there was a sense of community aboard. Strangers shared groundnuts and empathized with each other's woes. Adwoa sat silently by a window, grappling with her own turmoil. When she arrived in the village, the sights and smells of her childhood stirred a bittersweet nostalgia. Mud brick houses with corrugated metal roofs dotted the landscape, while goats meandered casually around the narrow, unpaved roads. Children greeted her with bright smiles, calling her name. At her family home, her mother waited at the entrance, arms wide open. In that embrace, Adwoa finally let the tears flow freely, burying her face in her mother's shoulder. Over the next few days, she sought solace in her mother's kitchen. They pounded fufu together, chopped fresh vegetables from the backyard garden, and reminisced about simpler times. But through every conversation, the dark cloud of her present troubles remained. Her mother advised her to seek legal counsel if Yaw's mistress was openly threatening her rights to the property. Adwoa realized she needed more than just moral support. She needed to protect what was rightfully hers. Traditional interventions often occurred in such marital disputes. Elders from both families might mediate, but it was unclear whether Yaw or his new partner would even listen to such counsel. While in the village, an unexpected visitor arrived. Her father's elder brother, Uncle Kojo, who worked in the city as a legal clerk. He was a man of quiet intelligence, respected among the family for his fair-mindedness. He listened carefully to Adwoa's account, stroking his gray beard thoughtfully. You must consider the legal documents involved in the purchase of that house, he advised. If your name is on the deed, or if you contributed significantly, you have grounds to contest any claims Yol or his mistress might make. The thought of going to court felt intimidating, but Adwoa recognized she needed a strategy. Na's arrogance was growing, and it felt like just a matter of time before she took an even more drastic step. Adwoa wrestled with her doubts. Part of her ached for a reconciliation, imagining Yol returning with apologies. But another part, awakened by the magnitude of his betrayal, demanded justice. After much introspection, Adwoa returned to Accra, albeit with a renewed sense of resolve. The bus ride back was just as long and dusty, but her mind was sharper. She was determined not to let the mistress bully her out of her own home. If you wanted a new life, fine. But the property they had built together was a testament to years of joint effort. She would not concede it without a fight. Upon her arrival, she found another surprise. Na's black Lexus parked brazenly in front of the house. Her heart pounded with anger and nerves. Stepping inside, she discovered the door unlocked. In her own living room, Adwoa came face to face with Na for the second time, this time with her arms folded defiantly across her chest, her face a picture of smug triumph. Her gaze swept across the room, as though appraising its aesthetic value. We need to talk about how things are going to change around here, she said calmly, as if speaking to an employee. Ya and I have decided I should move in. It was the kind of boldness that was nearly incomprehensible. Adwoa's mind whirled. She noticed that Na had already brought a designer handbag and a couple of suitcases with her, carelessly dumped on the sofa. The audacity left Adwoa speechless for a moment. This woman had effectively walked into her home, uninvited, and was now declaring intentions to take ownership. A rage Adwoa never knew she was capable of boiled to the surface. She found her voice, quivering with emotion. "This is my house," she hissed through clenched teeth, each syllable loaded with a desperation and fury that signaled she was on the edge of her limits. Na laughed, that same mocking, hollow sound Adwoa remembered from before. "Your house?" she repeated, her tone dripping sarcasm. "We'll see about that, darling." In that moment, Adwoa felt a profound shift within her, a realization that the coming battle would be fought not just for bricks and mortar, but for her dignity. Every seed of contempt Na had planted was blossoming into a full-blown war. And Adwoa, once gentle and naive, understood she could not afford to lose. It was mid-morning when Adwoa woke up to find Na still lounging in the living room, flipping through magazines as though she were a guest at a hotel. The sunlight streaming through the windows caught flecks of dust dancing in the air, and for a brief moment, Adwoa imagined she was in a surreal dream. But it was all too real. She noticed Yo's luggage by the hallway, presumably moved in overnight. Every nerve in her body was on high alert, a mixture of anger, fear, and determination swirling within her. A knock at the door rattled both women's attention. Before Adwoa could reach for the doorknob, Na glided over and opened it with an air of misplaced authority. Standing there was Yaw, dressed in a crisp white shirt and tailored trousers, a small travel bag slung over his shoulder. He didn't appear surprised to see Na answering the door. If anything, there was a certain grim acceptance in his eyes. He walked in without greeting Adwoa, as though she were invisible in her own home. The moment crackled with tension. Adwoa followed the two into the living room, her heart thumping painfully. She had rehearsed in her mind exactly what she would say to Yaw if he ever showed his face again. Yet, confronted with the reality, her husband standing side by side with another woman in their home, she found herself momentarily tongue-tied. Yaw cleared his throat. "Oh, we have to talk," he said, avoiding her gaze. "I'll be staying here for a while, and Na will be joining me." It took everything in Adwoa not to let her knees buckle. Her anger coursed hot in her veins, but she struggled to maintain composure. "Staying here? With her?" she repeated, her voice catching at the end. "Yaw, have you lost your mind?" Na let out a short, derisive laugh. "It's already decided. You can stay if you like, there's no need to make a fuss. But it won't change the fact that Yaw and I are together now." She moved closer to him, resting a possessive hand on his shoulder, flaunting her claim. Her manicure gleamed with expensive polish, and her perfume filled the room with an overpowering floral scent. Adwoa's head swirled. She reminded herself of her conversation with Uncle Kojo and her mother. She couldn't afford to break down or show weakness. Summoning a courage that surprised even herself, she stepped forward. "Y'all, I need you to remember something," she began, her voice shaky but firm. "We bought this house together. The paperwork is in both our names. If you want to move your mistress in, I'll make sure the law is on my side." For the first time, Yo looked uncomfortable. His eyes flickered to Na as if silently seeking her reaction. Na's lip curled in irritation, but she quickly replaced it with a tight smile. "I'm not worried about that. You see, Yo and I have plans, big plans. He's moving up in his company, and soon, money won't be an issue. I have enough means to buy this property twice if I want to." Her voice was dripping with overconfidence. "But we'll see who ends up with the last laugh." Feeling numb, Adwoa retreated to the bedroom to gather her thoughts. She called Isai, voice trembling as she relayed the shock of discovering her husband and his mistress had simply moved in. Isai was aghast. "You need legal help right away," she urged. "No more waiting. This is harassment, and you can't let them intimidate you like this." By noon, Adwoa had contacted a reputable lawyer recommended by Uncle Kojo. She left the house, ignoring the condescending looks Na threw her way. Navigating the congested streets of Accra, honking and weaving through the jam, she reached a modest law office in a small complex. The sign on the door read, "Kanu and Associates, Family and Property Law Specialists." Inside, she found a neatly dressed receptionist who ushered her into a private office. Mr. Kanu, a middle-aged lawyer with salt and pepper hair, greeted her warmly, though his expression turned grave as she explained her predicament. He asked to see copies of the house deed, any mortgage paperwork, and any evidence of her financial contributions. Adwoa promised to gather them. "We can explore legal injunctions to prevent any unauthorized occupant from staying in that house," he explained. "However, the success of such actions depends on proper documentation. You'll also need to keep calm and avoid confrontations that could complicate matters." The conversation gave Adwoa a flicker of hope. She left the office feeling slightly more empowered, though she was under no illusion that the process would be simple. When she got home, she found Yo and Na in the middle of redecorating. To her disbelief, some of her cherished family photos had been taken down, replaced with generic art prints. Her anger flared, but she remembered Mr. Kanu's warning, avoid a heated altercation if possible. In measured tones, she demanded, "Put my things back. This is still my house." Na smirked, arms akimbo. "As long as we're here, we'll do what we want. If you have an issue with that, you know where the door is." Adwoa clenched her jaw, silently vowing not to let them break her spirit. She retrieved her photographs and carefully placed them back where they belonged. She noticed Na's mocking gaze on her, a silent challenge, as if daring her to escalate the situation. Yo remained passive, flicking through channels on the TV, conspicuously avoiding any confrontation. Over the following days, life in the house became a tense standoff. Adwoa was astonished at Na's audacity. She took liberties as though she had every right to the property, from cooking elaborate meals in the kitchen to throwing expensive cushions onto the sofa and even inviting friends over. Once, Adwoa returned home to find the living room filled with glamorous women chatting loudly over cocktails. The conversation halted the moment Adwoa walked in, replaced by disdainful stares. Na introduced her as the former wife, and Adwoa left the room before the heat in her cheeks betrayed how humiliated she felt. Still, Adwoa stood her ground, occupying the master bedroom she refused to relinquish. She kept her personal belongings under lock and key, mindful of the petty cruelty Na displayed. She also gathered financial records, bank statements, receipts for house-related expenses, anything that could bolster her case should she need to take legal action. She was determined not to be a silent victim in her own home. One evening, after another exhausting day at her new sales job in a boutique, Adwoa returned to find Na giggling on the phone. The moment she spotted Adwoa, she brazenly put the phone on speaker. The voice on the other end was Ya's, serenading her with sweet words and telling her about upcoming business deals. Adwoa felt her stomach churn. She didn't want to overhear, but the purpose was clearly to torment her. Na winked at Adwoa, enjoying the show she was putting on. It took all of Adwoa's restraint not to lash out. She reminded herself that a chaotic outburst might ruin her chances in court. Later that night, sleepless and teary-eyed, Adwoa scrolled through her phone, reading about similar marital property disputes in Ghana. She felt a pang of empathy for all the women who had faced such humiliation. In the pit of her sorrow, a new determination began to take root. She was done tolerating the madness. The mere idea that Na could win, whether legally or by intimidation, was unacceptable. If the law was on her side, she would see this through. Word spread to family elders, and some began visiting the house, hoping to broker peace. But Na was dismissive, rolling her eyes at their attempts to lecture her on tradition and respect. Ya maintained a stoic, almost robotic demeanor, as though he had surrendered his moral compass to his new partner's whims. Adwoa sensed that any notion of reconciliation was out of the question. This was now about preserving her dignity and ensuring she did not lose the home she had invested her heart and finances into. The more Na strutted around with her millionaire confidence, the more Adwoa resolved not to be overshadowed. She might have come from a humble background, but she was no fool, nor was she weak. The walls that once provided comfort now stood witness to a ferocious battle of wills. Days turned into an uneasy routine, each moment taut with unresolved conflict. In the midst of this, Adwoa prepared herself for the next phase, a legal showdown that could change everything. Even though her heart felt heavy with betrayal, Adwoa reminded herself that the house was more than a building. It was the site of her dreams, a testament to her resilience, and a place she had fought to make her own. If Na and Ya thought they could simply waltz in and claim it, they were sorely mistaken. The fight had only just begun, and Adwoa's resolve was steeled by every mocking laugh that resonated through those once peaceful halls. Adwoa's decision to seek legal redress marked a new chapter in her battle to keep her home. She met with Mr. Kanu regularly, supplying him with every scrap of evidence she could find: bank statements showing her monthly contributions to the mortgage, receipts for furniture she purchased, and even communications where Yo acknowledged her financial role in building their life together. Each piece of paper felt like a protective shield against the attacks from Na. As the weeks wore on, tension inside the house reached fever pitch. Na barely hid her disdain for Adwoa's presence, often belittling her in front of Ya. If Adwoa walked into the kitchen, Na would comment loudly to Ya about how a village girl couldn't possibly understand fine cuisine. If Adwoa so much as adjusted the living room curtains, Na would redo them with an exaggerated gesture, as if claiming the space. Ya, for his part, shuttled between them, though his allegiance was squarely with Na. He no longer defended Adwoa or showed her the slightest empathy. One particular afternoon, Adwoa arrived home after a strenuous day at the boutique. She found Na in the living room surrounded by decorators, interior design catalogs spread across the glass table. Swatches of imported fabrics and paint chips were scattered around. The mistress was evidently planning an overhaul of the house. Adwoa's chest tightened in disbelief. Without a word, she headed to the bedroom, refusing to engage. The next day, Mr. Kanu filed a petition for an injunction to stop any significant alterations to the property until the ownership dispute was resolved. To her relief, the court granted a temporary restraining order that barred Na from making further changes. This small victory felt like a lifeline. When the police arrived with a court official to serve the notice, Na exploded in indignation, throwing the document on the floor. Adwoa stood by silently, her fingers shaking from the adrenaline of confrontation, but she felt a surge of triumph that the law was, indeed, on her side. Publicly, the matter became the talk of the neighborhood. A few neighbors witnessed Na's meltdown. Rumors flew. Some people condemned Ya for bringing this disgrace upon Adwoa, while others whispered in hushed tones about Na's immense wealth and rumored political connections. The strain on Adwoa was immense, yet she clung to the flickers of hope provided by Mr. Kanu's legal steps. Finally, a hearing date was set. Adwoa dressed modestly but neatly in a sleek ankara design on the morning of the hearing. Her mother traveled from the village to accompany her, clasping her hand in solidarity. The courthouse loomed large, its walls a pale, sun-beaten beige that had seen countless legal battles. Adwoa felt a twist in her gut as they passed through the entrance, the echo of their footsteps on the marble floors intensifying her anxiety. Inside the courtroom, Na arrived with a commanding presence, clad in a tailored designer suit, her hair in an impeccable style, and gold jewelry that announced her wealth before she even spoke. Ya trailed behind her, appearing tense but resigned. Adwoa avoided eye contact with both of them, focusing instead on Mr. Kanu, who whispered last-minute reassurances. The first hearing was largely procedural. Mr. Kanu presented the summary of Adwoa's claims, that she and Ya had jointly purchased the house, with documentary evidence of her financial contributions. He argued that Na's occupation of the house was unauthorized and that Adwoa had grounds to claim sole occupancy until the court could rule definitively on property division. Na's legal representative, a sharp-looking woman named Akojua, countered that Ya and Na were in a domestic partnership and that Adwoa was the estranged spouse. They contended that Ya had the right to decide who lived in the marital property, especially since his name appeared first on the deed. The judge, a poised woman in her 50s, listened intently. Her expression betrayed no partiality. She acknowledged the complexity of the matter, particularly the cultural context of marriage under both traditional and civil law. Since Adwoa and Ya had not formally dissolved their marriage, the property could not simply be claimed by a third party. The judge scheduled a follow-up hearing and maintained the temporary injunction on alterations to the property. She also issued a stern warning to Ya and Na about any attempts to intimidate or harass Adwoa. Back at the house, the atmosphere was even more volatile than before. Na was livid. She took every chance to undermine Adwoa, insulting her food, her dress sense, even her lowly job. Ya's attitude was a mixture of anger and guilt. Late at night, Adwoa overheard them arguing about the case. Na berated him, saying it was his fault for not settling property rights before she moved in. Their voices reverberated through the walls, leaving Adwoa sleepless and uneasy. Despite it all, she was relieved the legal process was in motion. One evening, as Adwoa prepared dinner for herself, suppressing the uncomfortable knowledge that Ya and Na had likely dined at some expensive restaurant, she received a call from Mr. Kanu. He had important information. Apparently, Ya was attempting to move large sums of money from the joint account he shared with Adwoa to a private account. If successful, it would weaken Adwoa's financial standing in case she needed further proof of joint funds. Mr. Kanu warned her to see if she could freeze the account or at least withdraw her fair share. Fearful of what might happen if Ya succeeded, Adwoa rushed to the bank first thing the next morning. At the bank, she felt a pang in her heart. She remembered how proud she and Ya were when they first opened the joint account, discussing future plans for children, a second car, maybe even a holiday home in Cape Coast. Now that dream was in tatters. Still, she steeled herself. With proper paperwork and a note from her lawyer, she managed to put a temporary freeze on large withdrawals. The bank manager, a woman with kind eyes, sympathetically shook her head at the situation. But if Adwoa thought that action would deter Ya and Na, she was mistaken. Later that day, Na confronted her. "How dare you freeze the account?" she hissed, eyes flashing. Adwoa noticed Ya standing behind her with clenched fists, a conflicted look on his face. "We needed those funds for business," Na continued, her voice rising with each word. "You have no right." Adwoa's fear coiled in her stomach, but she also felt a spark of determination. "I have every right," she replied, voice calm but firm. "That account was meant for our marital expenses, not for you to squander on personal luxuries." At that, Na looked ready to lunge. Ya quickly placed a restraining hand on her shoulder. The air buzzed with hostility. Adwoa realized in that moment that the couple viewed her not just as an annoyance, but as a real threat to their lavish plans. The tension festered over the next few weeks, culminating in another court appearance. This time, Mr. Kanu requested that the judge formally recognize Adwoa's right to remain in the house without interference. He also asked that Ya and Na be prohibited from disposing of any shared assets until a final decision was made. Na's lawyer, Adwoa, argued that Adwoa was stalling, using legal technicalities to keep Na and Ya from their rightful property. Ya himself took the stand, stating that Adwoa's name on the deed was merely a formality because she had pressured him into it. He painted her contributions as negligible, claiming she only handled small household expenses. Seated in the courtroom, listening to the man she once loved diminish her sacrifices and belittle her role in their partnership, Adwoa felt a wave of anger and sorrow so strong it nearly overwhelmed her. But she was done being quiet. When it was her turn to speak, she testified passionately about the years she had worked 2 jobs, one at a small bakery and another at a clothing store, to support them while Ya was establishing himself in his career. She spoke of how every sadie she saved was poured into the down payment for the house, how she had even borrowed from her mother's cooperative fund to help with the closing costs. She recounted the day they signed the deed, a day of celebration, and how he had initially thanked her for her unwavering support. The judge's gaze flickered over to Ya, who avoided eye contact, shifting uncomfortably in his seat. Na stared daggers at Adwoa. The gavel eventually came down, and the hearing concluded with the judge reserving her decision for a later date, requesting further documentation. As Adwoa left the courtroom, she breathed in deeply, relieved she had finally found her voice. The legal battleground had been drawn with clarity. No matter the outcome, Adwoa promised herself she would fight until the end for the place she once called home. Even if the house had become a den of heartbreak and conflict, it was still her anchor in a city that had witnessed her greatest joys and profoundest sorrows. And if she had to face down a millionaire mistress who mocked her at every turn, then so be it, she was ready to defend what was rightfully hers. Sleep became a luxury Adwoa couldn't afford. Every creak in the house made her tense, every laugh from the living room where Na entertained friends felt like a taunt. The once cozy atmosphere had turned unbearably hostile. She counted the days until the final court decision, praying that justice would favor her. In these intense times, small revelations began slipping through the cracks, revelations that chipped away at the illusions Na had so proudly built around herself. It started one evening when Adwoa, in desperate need of a break, accepted a dinner invitation from ESI. The 2 friends met at a casual chop bar near Labadi Beach, a place with plastic chairs under bamboo huts that served spicy tilapia and banku. Even though ESI offered Adwoa a place to stay, she declined, wanting to keep watch over her house until the verdict. The conversation eventually turned to Na's background. "I've heard rumors," ESI began cautiously, "but I wanted to confirm before telling you. People say Na's wealth might not be as legitimate as it seems. She's been linked to some powerful men in politics, and there are whispers of corruption." Adwoa listened intently, gnawing at her lip. She recalled Na's flashy Lexus, her unending supply of designer clothes, and the arrogance that dripped from every word she spoke. Could it be that her so-called millions were not entirely above board? "I've asked around," Desai continued, leaning in to speak more quietly. "Some folks in higher circles say she's known to launder money through shell companies. Nothing is proven, of course, but it's out there." Adwoa mulled over the information. Though she despised Na, she also knew that rumors could be dangerous, especially if they lacked substance. But part of her couldn't help feeling a stir of hope. If Na's wealth was tied to illegal activities, it might be easier to expose her. Still, caution was paramount. She thanked ESI and decided to keep her ears open for more concrete evidence. Back at the house, life crawled onward. One morning, Ya received a call that made him rush out in a panic. He barely acknowledged Na or Adwoa, just grabbed his car keys and left. Na scowled, demanding to know what was going on. That evening, he returned with a haunted look, retreating to the guest room without saying a word. Adwoa caught snippets of conversation between him and Na later. Something about an audit at his telecommunications company, a missing sum of money, and the threat of an internal investigation. A few nights after that incident, loud voices jolted Adwoa from her uneasy slumber. Slipping out of her room, she found Ya and Na in the living room, locked in a bitter argument. Na was dressed in a silk robe, pacing back and forth, her phone clutched tight in her hand. Ya stood against the wall, arms crossed defensively. I can't keep funneling money if everything is under scrutiny. You hissed. I'm risking my entire career for you. They're sniffing around at the office. Nah. She shot back. You promised we'd keep this going. My investors are expecting their returns. Or have you forgotten? If you won't help, I'll find someone else. Her voice trembled with fury, yet there was an undercurrent of desperation, as though her entire empire was on shaky ground. Adwoa's heart pounded. She carefully inched closer, hidden behind a hallway corner. The fight escalated, with Yo accusing Na of pressuring him into illegal financial transfers, and Na retorting that he had benefited from her money, her connections, and her extravagant gifts. At one point, Yo mentioned an offshore account, something about covering tracks before the auditors got suspicious. In that moment, Adwoa realized the toxic core that lay beneath their relationship. It was built not just on betrayal of marriage vows, but possibly on a deeper web of corruption. The morning after, Na was uncharacteristically subdued, sipping coffee in silence, occasionally exchanging tense glances with Yo. It struck Adwoa that they both seemed worried, their earlier bravado cracking. She decided to quietly gather more evidence. If these two were entangled in shady dealings, it could sway the court's perspective on the property dispute, or at least explain the urgency with which Na wanted the house. Over the next couple of days, Adwoa watched as Na and Ya conducted hushed phone calls, their tempers frayed. A letter arrived for Na, bearing an official-looking seal. She snatched it from the mailbox and stormed inside. Later, Adwoa overheard a tearful phone conversation where Na pleaded with someone named Big Man, insisting she could fix the problem. Amid the swirling tension, Na's once unshakable confidence wavered. Despite the chaos, the court date for the final verdict loomed closer. Adwoa felt torn. Should she reveal what she'd overheard to her lawyer? She lacked concrete proof, merely fragments of a conversation. Mr. Kanu advised her to stick to the facts regarding the property. However, he admitted that if Yo's finances were compromised, it might affect his standing in claiming sole ownership. Adwoa took comfort in the possibility that truth, in all its messy facets, might finally surface. On the eve of the verdict, Ya disappeared again, presumably to meet with company officials. Na sulked in the living room, flipping channels nervously. Late into the night, Adwoa found her rummaging through paperwork, cursing under her breath. The sight was surreal, her supposed millionaire mistress, so sure of her dominion, now panicking over documents. The next morning, tension hung thick in the air. A sense of finality pervaded the house. Each occupant prepared for the court hearing in their own way. Adwoa dressed in a crisp white blouse with a patterned wrap skirt, carefully reviewing her folder of evidence. Na applied heavy makeup to mask the strain, rummaging through her closet for an imposing outfit. Yo chain-smoked outside by his car, ignoring any attempt at conversation. In the courtroom, the atmosphere was palpably charged. Supporters from both sides were present, Adwoa's mother, ESI, and a few sympathetic neighbors, versus a couple of Na's high society friends who watched with arrogant smirks. Mr. Kanu stood confidently by Adwoa, while Akojua whispered furiously with Na and Ya. The judge entered, calling the court to order. After reviewing the arguments and evidence presented in prior hearings, she delivered her judgment. In a clear, measured tone, she explained that marital property in Ghana, especially under the standard legal framework and customary laws, recognized the contributions of both spouses. Adwoa's documented financial input was significant and undeniable. Her voice echoing in the silent room, the judge declared that the house remained marital property. Therefore, a third party, Na, held no claim, particularly while the marriage was still legally intact. Furthermore, given the evidence of Adwoa's consistent mortgage payments, the court granted her the right to sole occupancy until the marriage was formally dissolved or an equitable distribution was negotiated. A ripple of relief and excitement ran through Adwoa. The judge also warned Yo not to attempt any sale or transfer of the property without a court order, effectively blocking any maneuver Na might try. Na's fury was instantaneous. She sprang up, launching into a tirade, accusing the judge of bias, claiming her connections and resources made her unstoppable. The judge rapped her gavel, threatening to hold Na in contempt if she continued. Ya stood there, looking defeated. In the corridor outside the courtroom, a horde of reporters and onlookers gathered, drawn by the drama. Na tried to push past Adwoa, delivering a final, venomous glare. "This isn't over," she hissed, though her words sounded hollow. Adwoa let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. Tears welled in her eyes, but they were tears of relief. That afternoon, Adwoa returned to the house, her house, accompanied by court officials who served Na and Ya with the order granting Adwoa immediate possession. Na spat curses, but in compliance with the law, began gathering her things. Adwoa watched as the woman who had once laughed mockingly at her was forced to pack up her designer clothes, her fancy handbags, and her illusions of grandeur. In a last show of defiance, Na strode up to Adwoa before leaving. "You have no idea what you've done," she said, her voice trembling with rage. "You think you've won, but you haven't. I'm bigger than you, bigger than this petty court system. You'll regret this." Adwoa held her ground, her voice trembling but resolute. "I regret trusting Ya, I regret the pain I had to endure. But I don't regret standing up for myself. You need to leave now." And with that, Na walked out, Ya following her, still shell-shocked. He didn't even look back. In the driveway, Na's black Lexus revved angrily, tires screeching as they sped away. A hush descended on the house, as though it were exhaling after months of tension. Adwoa closed the door and slid down against it, tears streaming down her face, overwhelmed by relief, sorrow, and a cautious sense of victory. Yet, in that quiet moment, a small voice in her head reminded her that battles can continue even after the gavel has fallen. The secrets she had stumbled upon, the swirl of corruption and illegal dealings, and Na's parting threat, these all hinted that more trouble could be lurking. But for now, Adwoa allowed herself the freedom to breathe, to claim her space and her peace, even if only for a fleeting moment. The following weeks felt surreal, as though Adwoa were learning to walk again after a long, crippling injury. For the first time in months, she had her house to herself. She gingerly rearranged furniture, rehung her beloved family portraits, and tossed out items that bore the faintest reminder of Na's presence. The emptiness felt eerie at first, no more mocking laughter emanating from the living room, no more stifling tension in the corridors. Yet, that emptiness became a canvas upon which Adwoa could paint a new chapter of her life. Her routine slowly took on a calmer rhythm. She woke up at dawn, greeted by the soft glow of the sun as it bathed the palm-lined streets. She made herself a hearty breakfast of wache or kenki, savoring each bite with gratitude. At work, her colleagues noticed a renewed energy in her. While she was still cautious, the tight lines of stress had begun to ease from her face. ESI often dropped by the boutique, giving her a supportive hug or sharing laughter over the latest neighborhood gossip. Life was far from perfect, but it was undeniably hers again. Adwoa's legal victory didn't magically erase the pain of Ya's betrayal. Some nights, she still woke up breathless from nightmares, disoriented, half expecting to see Na's sneering visage or to hear Ya's dismissive tone. But each morning she found herself more determined to move forward. She enrolled in a short professional course on fashion merchandising, hoping to build a better career path. The house, once a battleground, became a sanctuary for her healing journey. Meanwhile, rumors swirled about Na and Ya. Word on the street was that Ya had resigned from his position at the telecommunications company under a cloud of suspicion. There were murmurs of an investigation into missing funds, and Na's name cropped up more than once. A newspaper headline even hinted at high society mistress under scrutiny for money laundering, though no official charges were confirmed. Adwoa couldn't help but feel a pang of pity for Ya. Once so confident and full of ambition, he now seemed trapped in a downward spiral. One sunny afternoon, while sweeping the front porch, Adwoa received an unexpected visitor, Ya. He looked disheveled, a far cry from the polished man she had once known. His shirt was wrinkled, his hair messy, and dark circles shadowed his eyes. For a moment, she was seized by a rush of memories, happy times, shared dreams, youthful plans for a future that would never come. But she steadied herself. He stood there awkwardly, his gaze lowered. "Adwoa," he started, voice gravelly with exhaustion. I wanted to talk. She hesitated, then set aside her broom, inviting him inside. The very act felt like déjà vu. How many times had they walked through this doorway as husband and wife? Now they were strangers. He settled on the sofa, the same piece of furniture that once witnessed Na's brazen displays of power. Adwoa took a seat in a chair across from him, her posture stiff, heart pounding. "I'm sorry," he said at last, eyes brimming with regret. "I messed up. In more ways than I can count. You didn't deserve any of what I put you through." The sincerity in his voice was disarming, but Adwoa remained cautious. "Why are you here, y'all?" she asked softly. He sighed. "Na's in serious trouble. The authorities are onto her for fraud, and I've been caught in the crossfire. I lost my job, my reputation is in tatters. I don't know what I was thinking. I thought she was my ticket to a better life, but it was all a lie." Silence stretched between them as Adwoa absorbed his words. She recalled the countless nights of tears, the humiliation she had endured. Part of her wanted to scream at him, demand to know why her love and devotion hadn't been enough. Another part felt a sad sort of vindication. After a moment, she asked the question that had haunted her for so long: was it worth it? He swallowed hard, shaking his head. "Not at all. I was blinded by greed and ambition. I'm sorry." Tears rimmed his eyes. For a brief second, he looked like the yaw she fell in love with, vulnerable and remorseful. "I know I can't fix what happened. I wanted you to know that I regret everything." She stood, crossing her arms protectively. "I appreciate your apology," she said, voice calm, "but what exactly do you expect from me now?" He nodded as though he'd anticipated the question. "Nothing. I know we can't go back. I needed to tell you face to face that I'm sorry. I'll respect the court's decision. The house is yours." He paused, his eyes scanning the familiar surroundings. "I hope one day you can find it in your heart to forgive me." Tears prickled the corners of her eyes, but she refused to let them fall. "Y'all, forgiveness is a journey," she said, exhaling slowly. "I might get there eventually, but not today." He rose, defeated yet accepting. Before he left, he tried to hand her an envelope, a bundle of documents relating to the house. "The deed. I want to make sure everything is legally transferred to you," he explained. She stared at it for a moment, then took it. No words could capture the mixture of relief, sorrow, and finality she felt. After Yaw departed, Adwoa closed the door gently, pressing her forehead against its wooden surface. She felt an odd lightness, as though a massive weight had been lifted. Despite everything, she knew a part of her heart would always ache for the innocence they once shared. Yet, she also recognized that some endings were necessary for better beginnings. After Yaw departed, Adwoa closed the door gently, pressing her forehead against its wooden surface. She felt an odd lightness, as though a massive weight had been lifted. Despite everything, she knew a part of her heart would always ache for the innocence they once shared. Yet, she also recognized that some endings were necessary for better beginnings. Over time, Adwoa found small ways to celebrate her newfound freedom. She hosted ESI and a few co-workers for a casual housewarming of sorts, reintroducing them to her home, now purged of Na's toxic influence. They laughed, played high-life music, and savored jollof rice she cooked to perfection. Her mother visited from the village, marveling at how her daughter had reclaimed her space. They exchanged stories, tears, and eventual smiles. Legally, Adwoa began the process of formally dissolving her marriage with Yaw. The divorce proceedings were solemn, but also a relief. She took comfort in the knowledge that she was no longer bound to a man who had so blatantly violated her trust. In the background, news of Na's downfall was whispered in social circles: freezing of assets, possible criminal charges, and investors filing lawsuits. Adwoa heard snippets here and there but chose not to dwell on it. She had her own life to rebuild, and she was determined to do so with grace. Standing on the balcony one evening, she gazed at the skyline of Accra. City lights shimmered in the humid night air, hinting at possibilities yet unseen. The breeze carried distant sounds of nightlife, music, traffic, laughter. She closed her eyes, inhaling deeply, allowing herself to feel gratitude for every heartbreak that led her to this moment. She was stronger now, more self-assured. She had faced betrayal, humiliation, and legal warfare, emerging with her dignity intact and her home still under her name. In a modern African city that never stopped buzzing, Adwoa's spirit soared with a quiet resilience. The house no longer felt like a relic of a failed marriage. It was a symbol of her perseverance. Every wall she had repainted, every room she had reorganized, was a testament to her determination to transform sorrow into strength. She took a final sip of her chilled hibiscus juice, savoring the tart sweetness on her tongue. Tomorrow held promise. Her fashion merchandising course would begin, and she had an early morning shift at the boutique. She felt the hum of anticipation for a future she was carving out on her own terms. And in that serene moment, as the moon rose above the twinkling cityscape, Adwoa whispered a silent vow to herself. No matter what obstacles lay ahead, she would face them with the same courage that had carried her through the storm. After all, she had learned that true wealth was not in a flashy car or a designer outfit, but in the unwavering resolve to stand tall when life tried to break her. And with that resolve, she stepped back inside her house, closing the door on the past, ready to embrace the endless possibilities of a new dawn. The end. If you enjoyed this story, we invite you to give it a like and subscribe to our channel. Your support motivates us to keep bringing heartwarming stories almost every day. We are very grateful for your support. See you soon.